Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, both in the room and online. You are watching Politico Live. My name is Bjarke Smith-Meyer. I am delighted to introduce our next guest. He is not only the Finance Minister of Ireland, he is also the President of the Eurogroup of Eurozone Finance Ministers, Mr. Paschal Donohoe. How are you doing? You're in Dublin, I guess.
I am indeed, Bjarke. I'm great, thank you. And how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Always well when I get the chance to talk to you. You've had a very busy week, as I understand it. You've been meeting with finance ministers across the whole of the EU to talk about banking union. Why don't you give us a little indication about what you've been up to?
Well, I want to just congratulate you on your insights and how well informed you are into the work that is underway.
Thanks very much.
And as always, your insight into our work, both within the Eurogroup and elsewhere, is really exemplary. And what I'm aiming to do is continue with the work that in particular, we were aiming to deliver there across last year about how we make further progress on banking union. As you will be aware, while we have made much progress on banking union, and I believe that progress was of real value when we were dealing with the economic consequences of the pandemic, it's an equally fair critique to say that we need an agenda regarding how we will make more progress and how we will bring governments and ministers together to deliver that progress. And I'm engaged in that work at the moment. We have committed to it politically in December and then again in January. And now I've met all ministers this week with a view to suggesting a framework for moving forward.
Banking union is such a wonderful term that can be used in Brussels where a few people in the real world can actually know what we're talking about. But in this particular aspect, you're homing in on the third pillar of the banking union, which is the European Deposit Insurance Scheme, which is the end goal of completing the banking union, of banking safeguards, but also making sure that depositors are safe in the next banking crisis. Now, obviously, you're not going to hopefully land EDIS, as it's called, anytime soon. That's just how it is. But you are trying to develop a work plan, which is what you've been meeting finance ministers for this week. Could you give us a sense about where we stand on getting this work plan, and how significant is it that we agree on it?
So I think you've made a really good point regarding banking union. You know, what does it mean to Europeans? What does it mean to the lives, to the prospects of all those that we serve and represent within the European Union? And the end point for me is to have a banking system across Europe that has two qualities to it. The first one is that it's even more safe and even more resilient than it is today. And the second quality then is that it is better capable of meeting the investment needs that we have to a better future, and in particular, find ways in which we can have deeper financial markets that are capable of funding our transition to a lower carbon and to a more digital future. So in terms of what we are doing on that at the moment, what I'm doing is engaged. I've now met all members of the Eurogroup, or all the ministers for finance in the Eurogroup and outside indeed of the Eurogroup that are committed to banking union. And we're looking at many different work streams in this project and trying to understand what are the ways in which we can move different parts of it together at the same time, and use that as a way of building trust to an end point that will be a deeper and more resilient banking union than we have now, and one that is more capable of meeting the economic needs that we'll have in the future.
So again, to the people who don't know, and I'm sure that many do because we obviously do have a very knowledgeable crowd here, but these different work streams that we or policymakers are working on, one of them is trying to reach a European deposit insurance scheme. Another is trying to solve the sovereign doom loop, so making sure that banks don't hold too much sovereign debt on their balance sheets. The third is making sure that capital and liquidity can move more freely across the banking union or the Eurozone in this particular point. Currently, subsidiaries have to have ring fences of liquidity and capital. And then very finally, we also have reforming the crisis management rules, so making sure that banks across the EU are resolved properly and there aren't any loopholes left in there. President, could you just give us a sense as to why you feel that this debate needs to be had with the finance ministers when, traditionally speaking, it's a job that's been left to the deputies to figure out?
Because of the political value of what is at stake at the moment. And I think one of the challenges that we have with banking union is, while you very clearly described the different components of it, underpinning the technical components of it are political choices. And political choices ultimately require ministerial involvement and then decisions. And my view is, given the urgency of looking to a better future and our banking union playing a part in that, it's very important that we commence that journey now with earlier ministerial engagement, and to do that in an inclusive and cohesive way. And that's what I've done. And what my plan is across the coming weeks to move forward with a proposal with regard to how we deepen banking union, how we complete it. And it is my aim that that proposal be one that has breadth in it, that does stretch across the different pillars of this project. And I also want it to be an ambitious proposal that looks beyond where we are immediately. And that is my priority. And I've begun the next phase of engagement with ministers regarding how we deliver that.
So from what I understand, what you have suggested to finance ministers is a three-phase approach. One that sort of like moves everyone's red lines a little bit further back, I suppose you would say. Now, can you give us a sense of what these three phases are?
So at this point, what I'm happy to confirm is that I am looking at the concept of sequencing. I do want to look at how we can make progress on key modules within banking union, how we can make that progress move forward in a way that has equilibrium and that achieves consensus. So one of the things in which we need to do in any political journey, and particularly a political journey involving the European Union, is we need to maintain trust and transparency as we move forward. So what I'm looking to do is sequence the different phases of this project, and then at each point have a degree of consensus and confidence that we can move on to the next phase. And clearly what those indicators are, what that time frame will be, are the kind of issues now that I'll engage with ministers on. But that concept of sequencing, getting to a more ambitious point in the future, is really important, as we move through each point, we have to move through it on the basis of consensus.
It's an interesting point, especially on I mean, you stress confidence there. I've spoken to a couple of capitals about this sort of multi-phased approach that you're talking about, and there is this concern that we could move, maybe create or get past the first phase. From what I understand, there is a sort of a liquidity providing facility as an EDIS, so a way of loaning money to national deposit insurance schemes that are in trouble, while then other countries, other areas would also move forward. But there is this concern that we might get through the first phase, but then get stuck there because no one can agree to move on to the second. How do you bridge that gap?
Well, it's really encouraging that the feedback from colleagues to you is that they're already looking to what the medium term will be like. And that is very encouraging because, of course, the step before that is one that we have long committed to making, but actually have not made yet. And while we have achieved much in banking union, we do need to achieve more in the near term. So it's encouraging that colleagues are already looking to what things would be like after we complete the first step. But you raise, and indeed ministers are raising, an important point with me, that we need to have a sense of motion. We need to have a sense of momentum. And I'm aware of that. So how will we manage that in the work ahead? It will clearly depend then on the mechanisms that we put in place to ensure that all countries, all governments are confident to move ahead to the next phase. And we'll need to get the balance in those mechanisms right. Because I do accept that it is important, as we lay out how we would get to the next phase of this project, that those indicators are balanced and that they indicate to colleagues that have important things in the future that they have a prospect of getting there. But I go back to my opening point. It is important that beyond even looking to the medium term, that we have to realise that taking the step in front of us is really, really important. And that's a key thing that we need to achieve in this work.
You mentioned medium term there. I think one of the things that the leaders also are hoping for is a time-bound work plan that allows you to then come up with this roadmap, if you like, that ultimately leads us to the holy grail that is EDIS. I mean, what kind of a time frame are you thinking in? Sort of 10 years or something?
It's not appropriate for me to indicate that now because this is a view. This is an issue that there are many differing views in relation to. And the final agreement, which, let me be clear, I'm absolutely determined that we will secure. An important element of that would be what will happen by when. So for now, respectfully, I can't indicate what an answer to that will be, because obviously in the hands of somebody like you, if as skillful an interrogator as you are, if I indicate where we're going to get to in the long term, you'll go back step by step, seeking to pare out and understand what we're going to get to in the near term. And this is all sensitive stuff, really, really important to many countries. And I want to give it the time now to tease this out, get it right and get an agreement.
I think probably the last question I have for you on banking union before I move on to fiscal guidance for next year is what happens if we reach another stalemate by the summer? What happens if we can't get a deal this year? Do we give up and move on, or do we keep at it?
I always put my energy into how we can maximise our prospects for success. And I need hardly tell you or your audience that really important projects based on integration, based on how we make further progress together, most of the time it looks like we can't get there until we actually do. So firstly, all my energy is how we get this agreement. We made progress last year, but didn't make enough. I'm determined to get there. However, it is also the case that if we can't reach that agreement, I think we will need to consider then what is the future of banking union, and what does that mean for our banking policy and banks and decisions that individual countries may make. And that will be an important issue to consider. Mm-hmm. It will be important to consider two things: the value of an agreement, but also what the consequences of not getting an agreement could look like too. But I'm really confident, based on the feedback that I've received so far, both publicly and privately, that colleagues are really putting their energy into trying to find a way through this, as opposed to preparing for what could happen if we can't get there.
Well, I wish you the best in luck in that. It's been 7 years waiting. Let's see what we get to that in the medium term. Moving to the fiscal guidance, we understand that in March 2nd, the European Commission will present treasuries and capitals with their sort of fiscal guidance for 2023, when we're expected to reintroduce the fiscal framework. So for those that don't know, that's a budget deficit cap of 3% and trying to limit debt to 60% of GDP. We at Politico understand that the Commission will in this guidance, will be a little bit more strict on the deficit side of things, but will be quite lenient on the debt side. I mean, do you agree with that general thinking?
So that's a decision and an initiative for the Commission to make, rather than me. And just as the Commission are very respectful of the work of Eurogroup and the decisions and debates that we have, and indeed our statements, I think I owe it to the Commission to let them wait to conclude their work and then publish their communiqué, which after all will only be a few weeks away. In terms of what the atmosphere is within ministers in relation to this, there is an appreciation amongst all ministers about the need to get the balance right. We need to get the balance right between continuing to guide ourselves towards another year of growth in an environment of increasing risk, and we're aware of what those risks are, and also with an eye then to how we can ensure that that our levels of borrowing, our deficits, our debts are sustainable. And my colleagues are aware of the balance that we need to strike there. And what we will be doing, and I know you know this, but maybe just to flesh it out a little bit, what we'll be doing in March in the Eurogroup meeting is having a further discussion on budgetary guidance for 2023. We'll be engaging with the Commission at that point. And the fact that we will be sending out a signal regarding our budgetary plans for 2023 in March 2022, I think is an indication of the commitment that we have within the Eurogroup to plot our way carefully through the time ahead.
I mean, it's an interesting one right now in terms of debating the fiscal rules, because the French presidency, of course, France has elections later this year, and that might play into this. But the ECOFIN, so the French presidency of the Council, has not actually taken this debate so far forward so far. We're only in February, and there will be debates around this at the informal. But it's largely been down to the Eurogroup to discuss this behind closed doors. Can you just explain to us what is the role that the Eurogroup plays in developing a consensus for the Stability and Growth Pact reform?
Well, I should say, in recognition of my good friend and colleague, Minister Le Maire, Bruno, will be organising what I think will be a pretty substantial informal ECOFIN meeting that will be happening just in a few weeks' time in Paris. And I would anticipate in that discussion that we'll be engaging in a lot of the really substantive issues regarding how we can invest and plan for our future. So I anticipate, in recognition of our French friends, that they will be engaging in this topic in the right way during their presidency. But nonetheless, just to go to the heart of your question regarding what is the role of Eurogroup. So our role falls into two different categories. The first one is that we have particular areas of the fiscal governance framework that are Euro area only. And I refer to the 2-pack, to the 6-pack. They're parts of the fiscal rules, which are the rules by which we organise and execute our budgets, that refer to particular things that countries who share the euro need to do and need to be prepared to do. So we have a particular role in discussing that. And then beyond that, what of course we do look to do is have political discussions that we hope can be of help and provide guidance to the Commission as they consider issues regarding these rules and how they will conclude the process. But when we are doing that, I am very mindful of non-Euro colleagues as well, who have very strong views on these matters. And we always ensure they're included in the right way so that we're being very inclusive. Because one feature of Eurogroup, as you'll know, and many of your viewers will know, is that the leadership and the figures within it don't change every 6 months. You're in it once you become a minister. And at times it can facilitate a degree of continuity in discussions that can be helpful to member states of the European Union.
The Commission had a public consultation on how to reform the Stability and Growth Pact in the fall. Did you write into that?
So we did not on behalf of the Irish government. As members of ECOFIN and Eurogroup, we have the privilege of being able to make our own national views known at the right time. And then on behalf of Eurogroup, certainly not. At this point, it wouldn't at all be appropriate to try to organise a common view on some of these issues, because we still have a fair bit of discussion and debate ahead of us.
Part of the debate that we've been having here in Brussels, Paris, I should remember where we are, here in Paris, is how the EU budget could actually fit into this general debate. And we had Jörg Kukies, the economic advisor to the German Chancellor, suggest that maybe at the next 7-year budget, we should probably have a look at just how much money is put into certain fields. He mentioned agriculture, and maybe that money could actually be siphoned off to climate. So I'm just wondering, what do you make of that? I mean, do you think that that is a good way of addressing the funding shortfall that we may have in dealing with climate and green investments? I'm not asking you necessarily to give me a firm view of what the Eurogroup says, but I'm curious to get your take as Paschal Donohoe.
But that happens every 7 years. Every 7 years, there's a very big discussion regarding where money goes in the very large budget of the European Union. What is the composition of the fund overall, and to what parts of the budget of the European Union is funding allocated. So that is already an ongoing feature of what are normally really, really difficult and complicated negotiations. So that will happen, happens all the time. In relation to agriculture and funding for agriculture, now, I'm not really sure the trade-offs are as binary as that. I mean, in fairness to a lot of the thinking that is going on in relation to the future of agricultural policy in a number of countries and the European Union, there is a recognition that we need to find a way towards guiding our agricultural communities, countries that have large agricultural dimensions to them, to farming practices that are more sustainable for decades and for centuries to come. And that debate is well underway at the moment.
I want to move on to a subject that you and I are both highly fascinated with, and that's the digital euro. You may have seen, if you were reading Politico by chance yesterday, that the Commission will...
Of course I was.
I'm glad to hear it. In any case, the Commission said that it'll propose the digital euro in early 2023. Now, you, in your Eurogroup agenda, have also put the digital euro down as one of the policy issues to discuss. So I'm just curious, what kind of topics do you think the Eurogroup can address as part of this, this proposal that's coming? Mind, there is a consultation that's likely going to come in March.
Yeah, so as I understand it, what the Commission are referring to is a consultative process in relation to the digital euro and the areas in it that they have a particular competence with regard to. I think that's entirely understandable that they will be looking to do that. In relation to those areas of us that are particularly important to the Eurogroup, we've actually been discussing this for some time, as you're well aware and have commented on before, about what are the areas that are important to ministers that we feel we need to give a very clear view with regard to. And at the end of last year, we've agreed a work programme in which we are doing that, that will conclude before the summer. So some of the key issues in relation to this are, for example, seeking to understand what would be the impact of the development of the digital euro on banking and payment systems as we have them at the moment. What would be the trade-offs and priorities that we would need to consider from a privacy point of view with regard to the digital euro? And what impact could a digital euro have on the international role of the euro and on developments that are taking place in the private sector in some parts of our world? And ministers feel that there are three particular themes that are important for us to consider. We're well underway in doing that at the moment, and I'd anticipate a little later in the year we'd pull together all our views in relation to this and give an important perspective of ministers on these topics. Because while this is a project that is technically deeply complex, it's also a project that could potentially be a very important part of the future of the euro. It's one that ministers broadly do support. It's also one that has some very important political considerations. And as somebody who's very privileged to represent politicians and ministers within this, it's very important that within this matrix of decision-making, our view is understood and heard, which in fairness to the Commission and to our central bank, it's a point they've taken and do understand.
So you mentioned there how a digital euro might impact the banking sector, privacy and the international role of the euro. I mean, are there any other policy areas that you could imagine would come up?
They're the three key areas that we're currently prioritising. Okay. We have a lot of, each year, we've structured engagement on the issue of the international role of the euro, where we stand with regard to that. What are the next things that are capable of developing that role? But for now, given the work that our colleagues in the central bank and in the Commission are doing, we think there are three particularly pertinent areas of engagement. At the end of the day, we're involved in a project that shares sovereignty, which is the euro. We're involved in a project that's about how we come together to create an economic instrument of great value. And if that is going to be developed further, ministers are eager and committed to make sure their views on these issues are heard.
So, I mean, I can understand how the digital euro might impact banks. I also understand the privacy concerns that some people have. But when people say lofty things like the strategic autonomy of the euro, and I mean, this is something that has been going on for a long time, I kind of get stuck. And I understand the general idea of trying to boost or take on, boost the euro or take on the king dollar in global financial markets or even commodity markets. But I can't quite understand how a digital euro will change that. And in my mind, I'm half wondering whether it's just a smokescreen to make sure that you don't have big tech coming in and taking over the monetary system. Am I completely lost in that, or am I not seeing something else?
There's no smokescreen, and you're rarely lost. What we are referring to here is, as we look to the future, monetary sovereignty, how we define a store of value, how we define means of payment, are core elements of a political project. And our tone in looking at the future of the euro is about how we strengthen the role of the euro in those areas. It's not about taking a defensive role. It's not about looking at how we can suppress or change what is happening in the private sector amongst other companies. That's up to them, it's up to regulators, and it's also up to us to make important policy decisions. This is a forward-looking project, not a defensive project. And at the heart of currency is how you define it, how it's shared, and how its credibility is protected. And in the digital world, where change is exponential on a daily basis, it's so important we think through those projects and think through those themes, and that is what we're doing at the moment.
But could you give me a practical, even for my own curiosity, could you give me a practical example of where a digital euro makes that difference in the world on the global stage?
For example, if we were to have a digital euro, what is the acceptance of it? Where is it used? Under what forms of transactions does it play a role? There are key areas that are very practical that would make a difference. You know, we have so many, other, when I say some other, a small number of other global currencies that have credibility and act as a means of payments across the entire world. And as they're thinking about their digital future, we need to do the same. So what would it look like? Is it a means of payment more broadly accepted? What kind of transactions is it used for? How can we protect it as a store of value? They, I think, are important issues if you care about the role of the euro in the future, as we certainly do.
Minister and President, thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, please give the man a round of applause so he can hear you from Dublin. Thank you very much for that. We will now move on to our next session, which is a spotlight discussion on EU banks after the pandemic. Reform or perform. This will be moderated by my colleague Hannah Brenton. It'll happen in a couple of minutes, so please everyone, please keep seated. And everyone online, we'll see you soon. Thank you very much.